Growing Together, a gardening podcast, is sponsored by Bloomfield Garden Center, a family-owned retail greenhouse providing locally grown plants since 1974. You can find them 1 mile north of Sabin, Minnesota, or 6 miles south of I-94 at Exit 6. Just a quick drive from Fargo-Moorhead.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Growing Together, a gardening podcast with me, John Lamb, and Don Kinzler, a lifelong gardener and the North Dakota State University Extension horticulturist for Cass County. Don, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, and I'm enjoying the middle of summer here. There's so much happening in our yards and gardens.
It is. It's great, and there's so much going on. There's so much that we're gonna talk about.
You know, in
today.
many ways, this is. I mean, we don't gauge the whole year. We don't sit around waiting, for the midsummer to come. But there's a lot happening. It's fun.
Yeah, and before
this is what we dream about for in the middle of winter.
It is. It's what keeps us going, isn't it? In the middle of winter and in those long springs that never seem to melt. Well, before we get too far, we want to let you know that this podcast is sponsored by Bloomfield Garden Center, a family-owned retail greenhouse providing locally grown plants since 1974. And you can find them 1 mile north of Sabin, Minnesota, or 6 miles south of I-94, just off Exit 6. It's just a quick drive from Fargo-Moorhead. Don, I got a joke for you. What kind of a plant will kill you if you stand under it for 5 minutes?
Sounds dangerous. I don't know what.
Well, a water lily. Well, so we're not going to talk about water lilies per se, but you had a column recently where you talked about some of your favorite midsummer plants and flowers in your yard, and we wanted to talk about a couple of those, being lilies of all different kinds and climatis.
Yeah, exactly, because this is the high summer time. Hey, I got to admit, John, it took me a little bit to catch on to that. I'm a little thick sometimes, and so I thought water lily. Okay, it was kind of raining down on a person. Then I got it. Oh, sure, a water lily. I'd be standing in a pond, submerged under that water lily.
If you're underwater for 5 minutes,
so once in a while I'm a little tense, but that's actually a great joke, John.
I should have. Maybe you can hold your breath. Maybe you are somebody who is so well trained. You can hold your breath.
I'd maybe do 10
minutes.
Seconds underwater.
I don't think I could do
great
5
joke.
minutes.
But anyway, so that's super.
Well, so before we get started and before we talk about some of the favorite things in your yard, this is the great time of the year to show off yards, and people have been doing that. There was recently the Red River Valley Garden Tour, and that sold out in 3 days. Really did.
Yes, those 300 tickets went fast.
Yeah, it went really, really well. So if you didn't get a chance to go to those, or if you did and you still want to see some other yards, there are some other garden tours coming up, aren't there?
There are.
And so one of the first ones, well, these are actually both on Tuesday, July 25th. And the Fargo-Moorhead Quilters are hosting a Quilt in the Garden tour on that day, on Tuesday, July 25th. The self-guided tour invites ticket holders to check out 6 notable gardens near the downtowns of Fargo-Moorhead, each featuring different quilts, adding additional decoration to the yards. Homeowners will be present to discuss the organic and fabric works of art created by members of the Fargo-Moorhead Quilters. Tickets for the event are $10 and are available at fmquilters.org.
That sounds like a fun event.
And if it sounds like I'm reading that, I was, because I wrote a brief on that for the paper. So I'm just reading right out of the form there. But yeah, that is kind of a fun thing, because I know a lot of quilters.
That'll be fun to see.
A lot of quilters will quilt. We'll use floral images or floral patterns or floral fabric.
And if you have the patience to quilt, you likely have the patience to garden.
Yes, exactly. You have to have great eyesight. You have to be able to the patience and the handiwork. It all kind of comes together. But there's another one, and kind of even a bigger garden tour coming up, and you're kind of involved with that one, aren't you?
I am. It is the NDSU Display Garden event, which is held each year, and it is Tuesday, July 25th, beginning at 3 in the afternoon, and going to about 6 or 7 in the afternoon. And that display garden, beautiful, by the way, it is at the corner of 12th Avenue North and 18th Street. So when you come down the big kind of overpass over the railroad yard, when you're coming down heading east, it's right there off to the left or to the north. So it's on the west edge of campus.
Yep.
So anyway, the beautiful display gardens with all the annuals and their perennials, and there are programs there. There will be a keynote on what to do about emerald ash borer. I'm talking about ways to get your annual flowers looking better, looking good. There's things on lawn care, how to do tea gardening.
Nice.
And so all kinds of things. A little something for everybody. Raspberries, hardy grapes. And so, that'll be a nice event. Tuesday the 25th, starting at 3. No registration is required. You just show on up. It's under a big tent right there at the corner of the display gardens.
And there's a small parking lot there, but I think you will be able to park along the street, not 12th Avenue North.
The NTA lot. The
TA lot. Okay,
parking lot will be available too, which is just a little bit from the display garden.
And I believe that there will even be some kind of a food truck there. I think it's like
an ice cream
treats.
truck.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
Yeah. Well, and I got to say, like that garden, Sam and I have been going up there for a couple of years. And you don't have to wait for a special event. It's free and open to the public.
Yeah. Anytime.
And so like a lot of times on Saturday or Sunday, we'll go up there and it's fun to see. They do a great job, not just
everything's labeled.
Everything's labeled. That's what makes it so great because they do a great job of planting, obviously, and taking care of it. But you can also see what planting something in a bigger group will look like and also how plants can kind of play off each other. But because they're labeled, it's just such a great.
I also should mention that just a little ways from those annual flower displays is the daylily collection. And that daylily collection is special because it's the largest institutional daylily collection in the whole country.
Yeah.
There are hundreds. I don't know how many. It probably approaches 1,000 different daylily varieties. So it's the largest in the country.
It's
something to see.
It's the largest, and it looks like they're doing some kind of expansion there, or they're doing some work out there. I saw that they had some earth movers maybe, and that they'd pushed up some dirt. So I'm curious to see what they got planned.
They're
out there.
Expanding an additional garden.
And that's something too that because of the time, this is really the peak time to go see daylilies, isn't it? Or to go see any kind of lilies.
Right. Daylilies are high summer bloomers. So right now, within the next few week or so, they're at their peak perfection.
And kind of just real quick, one last thing, what is the purpose of this garden? Because it's not just put out there just so that we can go along and appreciate it. It's kind of a learning and test garden, right?
Definitely. And it's an all-America display garden. There's 4 of those in North Dakota. One's a Peace Gardens, another in Minot, 2 in Fargo here. But anyway, so it is a test display garden. And so, it's there's purpose beyond just looking nice.
Yeah, so you'll also be able to go out and see like what works in our area, what will be winter hardy. As far as the perennials go there, yeah.
Definitely.
Okay, before we get into lilies, let's take a quick break. And then when we come back, you're going to tell us all about the different kinds of lilies, what we should know, what we should look for.
Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month. You'll get unlimited access to the news you need to stay engaged and connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe now to get 3 months of local news for only 99 cents a month.
All right, Don, so let's talk about lilies because I'm kind of new to this. There are a lot of different lilies that I see. There's lilies, there are daylilies, there are Asiatic lilies, there are Oriental lilies, and there's a thing called Orion Pet. You kind of wrote about some of these recently in a column that you did on your favorite midsummer flowers and perennials. Tell us a little bit more about lilies.
And one reason it's fun to talk about lilies and daylilies is because one of the goals of having a good perennial garden, and when I say good, it means something's blooming from early spring right through fall. And so we need to have things in our perennial garden that will give flower during each of these seasons. And so in the middle of summer, what really works well to include in the perennial garden are lilies and daylilies. Well, let's talk about both of those. Okay, and the flower shape of both those, lilies, daylilies, looks kind of similar. Kind of a trumpet-shaped flower. And so oftentimes, especially people new to gardening, might think, well, gosh, they're lilies. And so sometimes I'll get emails from people sending me this, and it's they're kind of just referring them to all to all of them as lilies.
Right.
But anyway, it's really important to distinguish between the two because their care is so different. So first of all, let's talk about daylilies. Now, daylilies, if you take a look at the plant itself, daylilies have kind of a strap-like leaf, a dark green strap-like leaf that originates from a central crown that's down at ground level. So all of those leaves are coming up kind of fan shape out of a spot right at ground level. And then the flower is formed kind of above that on a stalk, again, trumpet-shaped. The true lilies, before I go on to true lilies, the daylilies, if and when you dig down or plant a daylily, they're a fleshy root. They've got a fibrous root, but they've got kind of these big kind of tuber-like things underneath, not as big as a potato, but kind of an enlarged and fleshy type root, okay?
Okay.
So now we move on to the true lilies. Again, trumpet-shaped blossom, but instead of all of the leaves originating down at ground level in this big fan shape like daylilies, they have a stem that grows upright, vertically upright, and then the leaves come off of that stem. They're spaced along this stem that grows upright, and then the flower is formed up at top of that stem. And they grow from a true bulb. Think of an onion with all those layers to it.
Yep.
Well, true bulbs grow like that. So when you dig up a true lily or plant a true lily, it's a bulb underneath there. And so anyway, it is very important to know kind of the difference between those lilies, daylilies. And so if we talk about the true lilies, okay, then there are different types within that true lily group. Now, you mentioned Asiatic lilies.
Yeah.
Now, Asiatic lilies are the ones that the flower faces upright. They're actually the most winter hardy lily. They're the most commonly probably sold at garden centers. And they're winter hardy, fairly easy to grow.
Okay.
Kind of an upward facing. They don't have a fragrance though.
Okay.
Which, that's okay. They're beautiful.
Boy, I know that Sam, my girlfriend, does not like lily smell at all.
Sure. So Asiatic lilies are probably just the thing for her.
Okay.
Easy to grow. They're one of the first to start blooming in the middle of summer.
Okay.
Okay. And they're available in colors orange, red, yellows, kind of a rose pink.
Okay.
And then next we have the group called Oriental lilies. Now think stargazer lily. The one kind of the with the dark kind of burgundy down in the middle of the flower and then white on the edges, and that strong, very strong fragrance.
That's the one that they'll sell in a lot of grocery stores, as single stem or
the
bouquets.
stargazer lily.
Yep.
You see those in a lot of weddings and bouquets. And they're called the Oriental lilies.
Okay.
They aren't quite as winter hardy. I've planted them in the past. They need a little winter protection, but they're beautiful, have a great smell. Then there's another type called trumpet lilies. They grow taller, have a nice trumpet shaped. Sometimes they'll be facing outward, instead of upward, like the Asiatics. They're facing more outward trumpet. They have a beautiful fragrance. They're a little hardier than the Oriental lilies.
Okay.
Then they crossed the two of those, Oriental and trumpet lily, and called them Orient Pet.
Okay.
Combination of the two names. So it kind of combines the both. A little bit winter hardiness from the trumpet lilies. So they're more winter hardy than the Oriental lilies. And yet they have that good fragrance and beautiful flowers.
So with these true lilies, because they're bulbs, do you have to dig up the bulb at the end of the summer and winterize it?
That's the beautiful thing about these types of lilies. They can be left, they should be, they're meant to be left in the ground in the perennial bed. And so the Asiatic lilies, very winter hardy. The trumpet lilies, a little less winter hardy, but they still survive quite well in zones 3 and 4. Maybe plant them in a spot that gets good winter snow cover. That'll give good insulation. But they stay in the ground. They will multiply in time. So each year you'll see a few more sprouts kind of coming up where you first planted one.
Okay.
And every maybe 3-4 years in the fall of the year, you should dig up that bulb and it'll have little bulblets around, little plantlets around, and then you should reset those, space them out, reset so they don't get too crowded. But if you've never tried the actual true lilies, give them a try. They're beautiful. They're like actually kind of stunning. It's beautiful that you can grow something that nice. And so do give the true lilies a try. You can buy them at garden centers. You can order the bulbs online. They can be planted either spring or fall. So even this fall, you can plant them. And for digging and dividing, if you have some or you've got some, want to give a friend, the fall of the year, September, is a great time to dig and divide the true lilies.
And you said the oriental lilies are the ones that are maybe the easiest to
don't require lots of names. One's called the Asiatic lilies.
Okay.
And the easiest way to identify those is the flowers face totally upright to the sky, upward to the sky. The other lilies face outward or slightly downward.
Okay.
Both have a trumpet shape.
And the Asiatic, you said, is maybe the most winter hardy?
The most winter hardy.
Okay.
But if you like the fragrance of lilies and the biggest, beautiful trumpet-shaped lilies, then the Orient pet or the trumpet lily would be the way to go.
So we were talking about true lilies there. With daylilies, is there as much variety with the different species or the different kinds of the lilies that you talked about with the true lilies? Is there as much variety, or with daylilies, is it just a matter of the height of the plant and the color?
Yeah, you've got it. So now we transition to talking about the daylilies, which, of course, are where the leaves all come out of the central point at the ground level. They kind of fan out the leaves. And daylilies, of course, lots of varieties. Daylilies are the ones that we see in front of almost every dentist office and every bank. The variety called Stella d'Oro is that little yellow one. But there is a whole realm of daylilies beyond those that I think are more beautiful.
Okay.
And so within those, a couple of differences, and you hit the nail on the head. One is height. Some of them are shorter. They vary in color type, color and color tone, but also in flower size. Some of the daylilies will reach a flower size diameter of up to about 8 inches. That's a big flower.
Yeah.
And they have different forms. Some are ruffled. Some are kind of spider-shaped. And if you're thinking, when we mentioned daylilies, or if you're thinking the old type that used to grow kind of where nothing else would grow, they'd kind of spread, and they have these big, long these big, long flower stalk that arises out and maybe a little orange or yellow flower up above. Yep. You still see those in some spots. Boy, have the breeders progressed beyond that. These aren't your grandma's daylilies, and nothing wrong with those. They were pretty too. But there's a whole world out there of daylilies. And some of my favorites. One is called Spider-Man, which is a big flowered red with kind of a little bit of yellow-orange in it. There's one called Banner Man, which has a red center and a kind of a cream-colored edge, and it's all roughly.
Okay.
And they send up a lot of flowers. Now, daylily. Daylily means that each flower only lasts a day. Yeah. And then it kind of withers and drops. But they produce so many blossoms that you wouldn't even recognize that. You wouldn't see one coming and going because there's a whole bunch more to take their place. So explore daylilies. They are absolutely awesome. There are a lot of daylily groups also, online in the area and nationally. And so, do explore the daylilies. They're really easy to grow.
Yeah, and they are very winter hardy.
Very winter hardy. They love moisture. So I wouldn't plant them maybe in a dry area, the hottest, driest area you've got. I would not plant them there, but plant them where they get maybe at least a half day of sun, but a spot where you can keep decent moisture. Mulch goes really, really well. Fully winter hardy. And in a few years, the one plant that you planted will increase in a clump. They don't get weedy or wild, but they'll increase in a clump, so then you can divide that clump into more. One of the best ways that I like to use the daylilies in a perennial garden is with each of the colors that you've chosen, plant a little drift of maybe 3 or 5 of those, and then when that color is blooming, you have high impact.
Okay.
And so that's awesome. You also mentioned the height. They vary greatly in height. I mentioned the common little Stella d'Oro yellow flower daylily. I guess familiarity breeds contempt, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's a beautiful little daylily, but they're used a lot. And so, some of us have gotten maybe a little tired of seeing that one. So it's fun to plant lots more other types. So they vary in height. Some are quite low. Others will get quite tall, both in leaf structure. The leaf and plant itself will fan out to a taller height, but then also the flower scape that arises up out of the leaves will also be taller.
You talked about every 4 years or so, both with the true lilies and the daylilies, you can split them. The daylilies you split more than, and then the other one, the true lilies are bulbs, and then you can the bulbettes will kind of
right. They'll once you dig them, you'll find offsets of bulbs that you can separate off, then plant them by themselves.
What time of the year do you want to be doing this?
And for the true lily bulbs, in the fall of the year, September works well. Daylilies are so flexible, so easy to grow that they can be divided any time of summer. Most perennials have their certain specific time. Hosta are better divided in the spring. Mums and peonies, mums are spring also, but peonies are better done in September, but daylilies can be done almost any time of year during the growing season.
How about fertilizer? How do they do with fertilizer? Is that something that because I'm thinking of them
That's a great point.
Because they're so, they're if you buy a house, there's a good chance that you're going to inherit some daylilies, right? Because they're so easy to grow. They're kind of all around. If you're getting into it, or if you're coming into some, do you have to worry about fertilizer?
Fertilizer will help build the blossoms.
Okay.
So in the spring of the year, as they start growing and start emerging from the ground, if we fertilize in May and again in June with a well-balanced, it can be granular type, flower type fertilizer, water-soluble type, like the ever-popular Miracle Grow, which is probably, I don't endorse products, but that's certainly the easiest to find, or other water-soluble types work very well. And so when you start fertilizing daylilies and true lilies in the spring, May, and again in June, it will help build the blossom for that. So you do get better bloom. And you'll have a healthier green leaf as well. So fertilizer is really important. They're fairly heavy feeders. And with the daylilies, so how do you know for sure when you should start dividing some of these? Well, daylilies will increase in clump, but if ever you notice that the center is getting weaker, less growth in the center, it's a good chance then that it should be divided. Or if it just kind of looks like they've gotten to be too large of a clump and the flower size is diminishing, then it's a good idea to dig and divide.
Yeah. So at the end of the season, what should we do for cleanup with lilies?
Yeah, with the lilies and daylilies, fall cleanup is important to get ready for the following spring. So let's take each case maybe separately.
Yeah.
So daylilies, in the fall of the year, after the leaves have been frosted, after we've had a couple of good frosts, and the foliage is just kind of laying limp, they can be cut back. Can and should be cut back to just a little above ground level, maybe a couple inches. Now, with most perennial flowers, it's recommended to leave the tops on, the above ground portions on over winter, because that helps catch snow, and most perennials will just survive winter better with those above ground portions that we call the tops left intact. However, there are a few perennial types that during winter, the leaves just kind of turn to mush, and by next spring, they're more difficult to cut back.
Hostas seem like
Hostas, yeah. Hostas just plop all apart, and by next spring, you got kind of just a mushy mess to try to remove. Peonies should be cut back in the fall for disease prevention. And iris iris, too, just plop apart over winter, so they're best cut back in the fall of the year. And the other one is daylilies. You can leave the tops on and cut them back the next spring, if you don't get to it. But by the next spring, they're kind of awfully limp and more difficult to deal with. So in the fall of the year, late September, October, whenever we've had a few good frosts, then just cut the daylilies back all the way down, just maybe an inch or so above ground level. I use a kind of a hedge type cutter, hedge sharp shears.
Yep.
You can use even a gas or electric hedge trimmer to just kind of mow them off. That works too, but leave a little bit of a stub, above ground too. And with the true lilies, they'll have a taller stem, and that stem is best left on over winter, I feel.
Oh, okay.
For a couple of reasons. That marks where that lily is, because if you were to take that off, then you kind of lose the identity of where that's going to be emerging. So I like to leave that on. Again, it probably catches a little bit of more snow, but I like to leave the lily stalks on, of the true lily. Leave that on over winter. It kind of helps mark where that is. Then in spring, you cut it down in early spring, but it just kind of gives a little marker.
What about, especially with the daylilies, because they only last a day, once that flower head is gone, do you want to deadhead them?
You read my mind, John. On both the daylily and the true lily, once those flowers are gone, once they're spent, once they're withered and dried, yes, then deadhead, cut off that. And what we're trying to prevent is the formation of a seed pod, because that seed pod on either daylilies or the true lilies, that seed pod developing will stress the plant. It will sap some energy out of the plant. And that energy is best put down into the root system, so we'll get a really good, awesome bloom next spring. So unless you're a daylily breeder who wants to collect the seed, we should remove those. And now it's interesting, with daylily, the blossoms will pull off. If you just pull the withered blossom off, you're still leaving what will enlarge into a seed pod. So you need to actively cut off that little green part on which those blossoms were attached, if you follow me.
Yep.
So simply pulling off the petals isn't going to remove what would enlarge into a seed pod. So, and same with the true lilies. The petals will fall, or you pull off the petals, but that's not enough. You need to remove what is the green ovary that would expand into seed pod.
With daylilies, once the flower head, once all the various flowers are spent, would you just want to cut off the whole stem then, and then just leave the kind of these strappy leaves coming out of the ground?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So the flowers are attached to kind of a long stem,
Yep.
and that arises from the leaves. And yes, when they're all done blooming, then you cut that total down.
Because even while
from where it arises out of the leaves,
the flowers may be gone for the season, they may be done, but those kind of leaves, you create this kind of almost like a grassy area then, or a large, because they're kind of like large ornamental grass. That's the way I look at them. And so you have this nice thing that even after the flowers are spent and the flowers are gone, you still have this lush green leaves, strappy. I still think that they're a nice thing to have in the garden even then.
That is a great point, John, because yes, before they're blooming, they're pretty. Mm-hmm. After they're blooming, they're pretty. They're pretty during their blooming. And deadheading after they're done blooming helps sharpen up that appearance, doesn't it? The very same is true with peonies.
Yeah.
If after they're done blooming, if you deadhead them, cut off that, kind of down where it arises out of the leaves, that old flower, and it grooms that plant. And peony is almost like a shrub, a beautiful dark green shrub for the remainder of the season. Iris are the same too. The kind of the fan-shaped bluish green of iris. After the iris are done blooming and you cut off that old flower stalk, then iris even give kind of a good look to the perennial bed.
Yeah, it's nice to have the different feature. They're
it
kind
is.
of they're in the way they're
that
kind
texture,
of
color.
Yeah, they're almost kind of a fan-like too. But but they come up in their spikes and they're kind of bluish green. They're really, really nice.
Yeah, so your point is well taken. Not only does that preserve the energy when we deadhead, but it also grooms the plants so they look better in the rest of the perennial garden.
Well, we've got another one to talk about, another one of your favorites, and that's clematis. But before we do that, let's take a quick little break.
Great, it'll be fun to talk about clematis.
When you can't make it to City Hall or school board meetings, local journalists from Inforum.com will be there to report the facts and get your questions answered. Local news works for you. Stay up to date at Inforum.com.
Okay, so let's talk clematis. And first of all, am I pronouncing it right? Because I've heard of it as clematis, and I've heard other gardeners say clematis.
Yes, yeah. In our area, I think clematis is the more common. That's how I grew up hearing it. But now a second way of pronouncing it is climatis.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. I once got an email from somebody, because occasionally I've written garden columns on how to pronounce some of these things. And when I discussed the two ways of pronouncing clematis or clematis, somebody wrote back and said, if you pronounce it clematis, it sounds like you're putting on airs.
Ah.
I suppose there's something to that as well. But yeah, fine. And clematis is certainly the queen of the flowering vines. Vines that we can grow that are winter hardy for the upper Midwest. Clematis has to be at the top of the list.
Well, and then also as a vine that it'll grow, but you don't have to worry about it necessarily taking over. It will spread, as it grows up.
That's a good point.
But it doesn't.
Not all vines play nice.
Yeah,
with their
it's
neighbors.
non-invasive and it won't choke out other things. Talk a little bit about clematis. What makes it such a favorite for you?
Favorite for me is because it grows strong and vigorous. So with a few pointers, that we'll talk about, it grows strong, vigorous, fully winter hardy. Does well even without extra winter protection. It's beautiful, has quite a long bloom time, and it's just absolutely beautiful. Now, my favorite is the Jackman clematis, and that is the one that we probably see most often because it blooms so heavily, and that's the one with the kind of navy blue, purplish blue. There are other clematis varieties, too, that are beautiful. There's red types, there's white types, and so there's others. But I still feel, and those are well worth planting, too. I want to get some of each of those too. But the Jackman clematis, I feel, is probably the most vigorous. So if you're going to choose one and want a lot of impact, I think the Jackman clematis, and that's probably the most commonly sold because it does so well for us. Now, one thing I should mention, when a person buys clematis at the local garden centers, it takes about 3 years for that clematis to develop a well-established root system. And then each year it will come up from that established root system. So it gets better and better. But give it at least up to the third growing season. So don't be alarmed if at first it maybe isn't really prolific, but it'll get better. And then once you have it in place, it'll last many, many, many years.
We were in that group of people that planted it, and we were like, what are we doing wrong? Are we overwatering it?
It was a little wimpy the first few years.
Are we underwatering it? And it didn't really take off, and we're thinking, like, did we make a mistake? In fact, one of them we pulled out, and Sam just thought, well, maybe put it in an area where it gets a little bit more sun. So put it in an area where it's facing west, but it's blocked by some dogwoods. So and it's taken off, but that is now, I think that plant is about 3 or 4 years old. The other ones that we've planted, and you can see we planted in the same area. We built a trellis for it. One is shooting straight up, and the other two are coming along. And I think next year they will all be growing probably more at the same speed.
Yeah. Now you bring up a couple of really good points. One is the location. They should have at least half a day of sun. If they don't get at least a half day of good, strong sunshine, then they'll be weaker. But the fun thing about clematis is with that winter hardy root system, and usually they will usually die back each year to the lower maybe 6 inches or so. So it's not a vine that bursts forth from the old vine that's up above. Which is fine because in the course of one growing season, it just grows tremendously from the ground level. So it dies back. So it's important for a newer gardener to realize that it dies back to that. But each year, as that root system kind of expands and these shoots come from the ground, each year you'll have more shoots coming from the ground. So it doesn't just remain with that one stalk that you planted. Each year, you get a clump forming, and so it's fun for me in the spring of the year to look and see how many shoots are coming up out of the ground of that clematis. And they grow so quickly so that by the middle of summer, what started out as these sprouts coming out of the ground, by midsummer, well, let's see, right now ours is probably a good 10 feet up on the trellis.
Yep.
And tremendous growers. And right now, in mid-July, it's just at full peak bloom.
See, we've got the one that we moved to that's facing west, blooms earlier, and I'm not sure if it's because gets the more direct late afternoon sun. But then I think last year at least, one of the older clematis that we had really blooms much later, too, like maybe in like August or mid to August. Really kind of nice. But really, with clematis, location means a lot there, right? You don't want to just put them any place.
It does, yeah, because they do need sunshine, plenty of good sunshine, but also there's a wonderful old saying with clematis, and that is that they like their head in the sunshine and their feet in the shade.
Yeah.
And feet in the shade, the roots in the shade, mean that they love cool soil. So if we put them in a spot that gets lots of good sunshine, but if it's a hot spot, then they don't like that. The preferred location would be, and I mean, not the only location, because yours faces west, but like you say, you've got dogwood that is giving some shade to the roots. Its feet are in the shade. But a preferred location, if you have a choice, would be on the facing east, the east side of a building. That's where we have ours on our garage. And it gets good all day, all morning sunshine. But then in the heat of the afternoon, it's in the shade. And so if you have the chance, 4 sides of a building, choose the east side. That works really, really well. But now if you have to put it on the north side, it probably isn't going to bloom so good. But if you choose the south side or the west side, that can work. But just shade the roots, keep its feet cool by doing one of 2 things. You can plant some low-growing shrubs in front, or making sure like that your dogwood shades the roots. Or the other thing that I found really that clematis love is a good layer of mulch, such as wood chip mulch. Keeps the soil cool and also gives it the moisture.
Where we had them up against our garage, the dogs would run through there a lot. And so that's another reason we thought, and because they're such a frail, the vines are relatively,
they can break easily.
They're very slender.
Yeah, so dogs and clematitis probably wouldn't mix if the dogs are running.
So we had to put little cages around them, and then we put mulch both inside and outside the cages. So it did help keep them, I think, cooler too. What any suggestions on plants that you would use to use as shade plants for?
Could use annual flowers, such as some of the taller marigolds or zinnias, something like that. You could plant annual flowers in front. That works well. I just use mulch. I used cardboard, or you could use landscape fabric too, but I used cardboard and then with wood product mulch over that, and that does a good job. Make sure you keep the moisture up good. Every once in a while, give it good soaking. Oh, and one other good tip. A clematis will really respond to fertilizing. So in May, kind of as they're starting to come up out of the ground level, in May and again in June, give it good water-soluble fertilizer. I think works so well. And on each clematis, mix up maybe about 3 to 5 gallons of that solution.
Really?
Slowly pour it over the root system, and that you'll really see that in the middle of summer. It will really
3 to 5
respond.
Gallons.
Yeah, 3 to 5 gallons to really soak it down. That would be on an established clematis. Maybe one that's recently planted over the last year or 2, then maybe towards the 2 to 3 gallons. But on a well-established clematis, I would easily apply somewhere 3 to 5 gallons. I could easily put a 5-gallon bucket of solution on that.
Now, I read in one of your old columns that you have another tip for clematis, and that tip is pinching.
Yes, I learned that from, I got another, remind me of one other tip. Yes, I learned this from my mom.
Okay.
She was a great one for pinching plants. For example, if you pinch a zinnia when you plant it, where you had one shoot coming out the top, you get two, which doubles the blossoms. Clematis are the same thing. When they start growing in May, they send up a shoot, okay, and that shoot has a growing tip, a growing point. And if you pinch out that growing point where there was one growing point, it develops two. There are two. And so you can double the amount of vinage on your clematis by doing that pinching. And it should be when the vines are just kind of emerging from ground level, or sometimes they'll go down to like maybe 6 inches above ground level, but most come from the base. But anyway, when they're only maybe 6 inches high, 8 inches, then pinch out that central growing point. And it's that kind of thing that, excuse me, that when you look at, you'll say, oh, sure, I know what Kinzler meant. So pinch out that central growing point, and where there was that one point, it will soon develop two.
Is that something that you want to do? Do you want to just do it that once, or do you want to? Yeah, okay.
Once
a year?
is usually fine. Yeah, if you did it too many times, it would probably delay blooming on it. But that's one way to double. You don't have to. Your clematis isn't going to die if you don't pinch it. But that's one way to kind of increase the amount. Oh, I was going to tell you about another tip.
Another tip, yeah.
They can be grown on almost any trellis. But one trellis that I found that really works well, especially if you attach it to the side of a building, is a section of chain link fence.
Oh.
The width is just perfect. Well, it probably comes in different widths or heights of fence, but like a 3 foot, 4 foot wide, easily 4 foot wide, and attached to the side of a building or garage. I used a couple of strong cup hooks at the base, couple of strong cup hooks at the top, ran just a threaded rod through those cup hooks, and attached the chain link fence to that. A wonderful clematis trellis then, in which they can easily vine around, and quite sturdy.
Yeah, we built a trellis, and then we, after a couple of years of realizing that maybe there was too much space between the wood, I started running fishing line between all the way through. So it's relatively invisible, and it looks like they're just kind of growing across. It's really kind of a nice thing. It's a little bit more work than probably than I like the chain link fence.
The chain link fence really does work quite well, and it looks pleasant. Pleasant. Maybe a wood trellis might look even a little more pleasanter, but it works really well. Oh, that also brings up the point of, should the vine be cut down in the fall?
Yeah.
The clematis vine. You don't have to. You can wait until the following spring to cut it down. I just leave mine up on that trellis.
Okay.
It gives me something to look at during the winter time. Mm-hmm. And so I cut mine down in the spring. But if you prefer, you could cut it down to maybe 6 inches above ground level in the fall of the year.
Do all clematis need some kind of a trellis, or are they all climbers? Are there some that just kind of I think I've seen something there are some that are ground that just kind of grounds.
Yeah, they're kind of a shrub type clematis. I don't have one, but that's on my list. There are kind of a shrub type clematis that doesn't need a trellis, doesn't need support. They grow in kind of a rounded mound. And so, yeah, that's on my list. So check locally owned garden centers also for that type of clematis. They're pretty.
All right. Well, so we've talked. You had a recent column, we should say. If people want to see more about your favorites, midsummer blooming plants and flowers, they can look up your archive in the Forum. And if people have questions for you, what's the best way to reach you?
Yeah, feel free to email me. I love photos, and it doesn't always have to be if something's going wrong. I mean, I like to help solve problems too. That's what gardening is sometimes about. But also if you have some successes. Somebody send me a photo of their clematis.
Yep.
And just beautiful. So that's fun to see too.
Yeah, if people have a different way of growing a clematis, I mean, as far as a different structure or a trellis, I like the chain link fence. If listeners have a different way that they grow them, I'd like to see that too.
Yeah, I would too. And sometimes people will write in with a tool or a technique, and that's always fascinating. Or if you have something we need to consult on, a bit of a problem, we can help solve that by email too. So email address is donald.tillman, Kinzler. I'll spell that Kinzler. Sometimes it would be easy to put an S in. So donald.kinzler@ndsu.edu.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for another episode of Growing Together. Don, as always, it's just a pleasure.
Oh, gosh, I enjoy our weekly chats.
Well, you have a good week, and we will talk to you next week.
Have a great week, everyone.
Growing Together, a gardening podcast, is sponsored by Bloomfield Garden Center, a family-owned retail greenhouse providing locally grown plants since 1974. You can find them 1 mile north of Sabin, Minnesota, or 6 miles south of I-94 at exit 6. Just a quick drive from Fargo-Moorhead.